You are listening to All In, a podcast dedicated to helping you fulfill the mission of God in your life and around the world. I'm your host, Jeff Roper. Hey, everybody. Welcome to this week's episode of All In. I'm glad that you're able to join me today. Here's the question. Can God be trusted? When you've dedicated your entire life to serving God and his people, can you really trust God? Now, it's easy to give platitudes and slogans, but what about when the unthinkable happens? When one single event wreaks destruction on everything that you have spent your lifetime building? Well, our guest today has gone through such an experience. Steve Mickel had it all: a beautiful wife and family, a beautiful community, a thriving church, a full life. Then on Thursday, June 16th, 2016, the unthinkable happened. And today we're going to explore some of that and what happens to a man, to a family, to a person when they go through the unthinkable and they try to learn to follow God in the dark. Steve, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Jeff. Really great to be here. Thanks for the invite.
Hey, thank you. I so appreciate it. You know, I've looked for the words to say, both when we ran into each other in Nashville at our U.S. Foursquare convention. And I remember I ran up to, so we ran into you guys and I was talking to Suzanne. I said, hey, by the way, congratulations isn't the right word. I don't know what to say, but thank you guys for producing that book that you wrote. And I think that, again, it goes back to it. It's just thank you for writing it and doing your book, Walking in the Dark, Trusting God When Life Happens. So Steve, give us a story. Tell us what happened.
Yeah. So on that June 16, 2016, we came into the office. It was a Thursday morning, normal day. We pastor a church in Bend, Oregon. And within a half an hour of arriving, my wife and I both work here at the church. Arriving at the church, 3 police officers come in and come into our office and proceed to tell us that our son had been killed in a 1-car accident just outside of Bend on his way to work. We didn't know the details at that time, but we came to find out later that most likely a deer had jumped out in front of him, swerving. He swerved, overcorrected, flipped the car 4 times, and was instantly killed. And that's the day that everything changed. I mean, nothing's been the same since. That began a journey of that the outcome ended up being the book. That I never intended to write a book about my loss. That was the last thing on my mind. But my journals and my thoughts through that season ended up. I was convinced by my team here at the church that I should probably write this. It might actually help some other people who have lost. I remember a guy, Brad Williams. I think he's been on your podcast.
Yeah,
He handed a book to me a few months after Chase died from a guy named Jerry Sitzer called A Grace Disguised, which I quote heavily in my book because he was the guy that I walked with that first 6 months after and really, really helped me process my grief and try to understand God in the midst of it. And to be honest, Jeff, I lost a little bit of my faith for sure. I was like, how can God allow this? I kind of was still living in this, what I call an Old Testament mindset, where if I do certain things, God will do certain things. If I obey him, he'll bless me. Right. I mean, I grew up in that kind of context. And so I obeyed him, Jeff. I mean, I thought I did.
Yeah.
And then this happened. And then I started thinking, well, maybe I didn't obey him. And there's a long list of things that probably, that if I shared with you, some might think, well, God was justified in taking my son because of that old way of thinking. Mm-hmm. And of course I went there, I went to all these places and I had to rediscover again who God is in the midst of suffering and loss.
That was one of the things I appreciated about how you processed it in the book. You never tried to answer the question, why God? Or am I to blame God? Who's to blame?
Yeah, I tried for a minute. I remember it was a day or two after Chase died. I woke up and there was one scripture that was like in my head. I mean, just came out of nowhere. And it was the scripture of when David sleeps with Bathsheba and has a kid with her, and the kid is born. And the narrative says that God took the kid because of David's disobedience. That's
Right.
the story. That's the Bible story in my head after
Right.
Chase died. And so I'm thinking, yeah, I mean, I'm like meeting, I'm like talking to my wife and my other sons. I have 4 sons. 3 of them are still with me. And I remember like apologizing, like asking for forgiveness, because it was my fault. And that was the paradigm that, in those really dark places, that was my paradigm. And I had to search my way back to, who God really is to me, which is not that. And I am probably more convinced now than ever who he is.
How did that happen?
Well, I got away from everything that was important for me. And the people that I was reading talked about the importance of when you go through hardship, when you go through grief in particular, when you lose a child, really any kind of grief, that, most of life is like you're trying to get through it. You're just trying to make it, you're trying to survive. And they describe it like the sun, trying to catch the sun when it's going down, when it's setting, and you just can't catch it. You just can't get to it. And I share the story in the book because it was so impactful to me. And they said the only way that you're going to get the sun is to walk through the dark and catch the sun on the way back up. And that was like, for me, that was the image, the metaphor to help me do what nobody wants to do in the midst of grief or loss or hardship, is to walk through the darkness of that and to let it be pitch black. I don't know what I'm going to do. I don't have the answers. The answers I once had don't seem sufficient for what I'm going through. And how do I find my way through this darkness? And most of the people that helped me write the book said, well, it's not walking in the dark, it's walking through the dark, right, Steve? Because we want hope on the other side of this. I'm like, listen, when I was in the middle of it, there's no through. There's no light at the end of a tunnel.
Right.
I mean, if it's a long enough tunnel, you don't see any light for a very long time. And that I gave myself permission, and I would give anyone permission now after going through what I went through, to walk as long as it takes through the darkness. Eventually I can say there will be light, but I recognized that for many, many months and years even, it was dark, and it took a while.
One of my disciplines that I do every day is I pray through Psalms. And, so about every 7 weeks I've prayed through the book of Psalms. And there's one of them, and multiple times in there talks about this pouring out your grief, and God has clothed himself in darkness.
Yes.
These songs of lament. God, where are you? And I can only imagine, Steve, as you and Suzanne went through this, that it was just like you said, you don't look at it as going through it. You just figure it feels like you're going to be in it forever.
Yeah, you do. And that actually was probably the most transformative thing for me, was realizing who was in the tunnel with me. Or I use the illustration of hiking up a mountain with my sons in the middle of the night, which is a true story. And I use that throughout the book, but it's like this, who's with you in the dark? And that is probably a more important answer to that question than, am I going to make it? Am I going to get back to the light? I think for me, at least, the most important question was, who's with me in the dark? And what I came to realize, again, Jeff, it wasn't because of religious platitudes. It was because of personal, real experience, is that Jesus was sitting with me through the dark, all the way through it. He never left me. He was weeping with me. He was broken with me. He wasn't trying to fix me. He wasn't trying to patch it up and make it better right away. He was just sitting there with me and letting me hurt. And that, you got to deal with that. At some point, you got to deal with the God who allows suffering, and you got to kind of figure out what you're going to do with that. For me, I figured out, well, I don't understand why he allows some things to happen. I still don't understand that, but what I do know is that he's with me in it. And that's really powerful. And I also don't believe God caused it. I have an opinion about who caused my son's wreck, and it wasn't God. Right. He's not on that list. He was for a while,
Mm-hmm.
be honest, right? But he's not on that list. My son's on that list. Maybe he didn't get enough sleep the night before.
Mm-hmm.
The devil's on that list, and because he comes to steal, kill, and destroy, and I believe he's a punk, and he just wants to make life really bad for all of us. And so there's other people on that list, but what I realize is that doesn't matter. Like, who's responsible? You can get lost in that hole of
Yeah.
trying to blame someone. And I did that for a while, but I realized there's nothing on the other side of that.
Yeah.
I had to sit in my grief with my God and let him speak his words of love and life and hope and courage into my soul.
You said you got away, and you kind of, I'm assuming you stepped away from your pastoral responsibilities and stuff. Tell us about that. How long did that process last?
Yeah. So the Sunday after Chase died, so he died on a Thursday. That next Sunday, I wasn't at church. I was supposed to host for a guy named AJ Swoboda, who was speaking, and he changed his whole message around on that Thursday to speak on Sunday to a church who was also grieving. But then that very next Sunday, I'm back in the pulpit. I wasn't preaching, but I was back to say, hey, everybody, I'm here. Thank you for your prayers, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
But then that very next Sunday, Jeff, I'm back in the pulpit preaching. And I don't know what it was. People look at me like, that's crazy. Why would you go right back into ministering? I got to tell you, for me, there was an anointing on that moment. But I can tell you this, that didn't last.
Okay.
About 3 months after, it was October. I remember it was another Thursday, and I'm supposed to preach on Sunday, and I can't. There's just no way.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm empty. There's actually no way for me to get up and do that. I couldn't do that anymore. So I called my team in. I told them, part of me thought, I wonder if I'm going to get fired. This is, I mean, preaching is one of the primary things a pastor does. I can't do that anymore. What are they going to say? And they just said, we wondered when this was going to happen. Mm-hmm. We wondered when you were going to get here, and we've got you. That was the day that they gave me a no end in sight sabbatical. I put time on it because that's kind of the way I am. I was like, well, I can't be gone forever, but they just said, whenever you come back, you come back. And so my wife and I took a 3-month sabbatical through the end of the year, and just got away. We didn't go to church. We traveled. We went back to all the places that we lived with Chase. We did a lot of reflecting, a lot of writing. And it was so healing for us to do that together. We spent a lot of time with our other sons and our daughter-in-law, and we just soaked in relationship and our grief, and we allowed it to be really, really bad and really awful like it is. And we didn't try to get busy again. I think that's what I tried to do right away. I tried to stay busy to try to numb my pain, and I just wasn't walking back through the dark, to find the sun on the way up. I needed to do that. And so that's when I got away to do that.
Okay. Now your 3 boys that are still with you, Hudson and Kincaid and Spencer, were they with you on that journey when you would go to the various places? Did they participate with you?
They did not. They were still in school, and that was
and their age. How old were they? And Chase was how old?
So Chase was 21.
Okay.
And so that Kincaid was still in high school. Spencer was a middle schooler. And Hudson had just gotten married. So he had his wife, and they kind of had their life, and they were working and all of that. And we didn't want to take Kincaid and Spencer out of school. So we processed with them for sure, Jeff. It wasn't like Suzanne and me were off doing our own thing. We helped them process, but it was done. So we traveled kind of on our own, but we were home quite often as we walked with them through that. They each have, if you interviewed them, they each would tell you a different story about their journey, right? Because grief, if Suzanne was here, she'd tell you a different story about her grief. And that's one thing we learned through this is everyone grieves differently, and we have to give each other space for that.
Yeah.
And most couples actually don't make it when they assume the other person should be grieving more or differently or less, and they don't find compatibility in their grieving. It's because they have too many expectations on it. Everybody's different. We were all in different places. It actually took my second son Hudson over a year for him to get to a place where he was ready to process.
Yeah.
So everybody is in a different place, and we had to give each other space for that.
Mm-hmm.
I would say, Jeff, one of the hardest things for me in going through this was I couldn't be the strong dad for my boys.
Hmm.
I couldn't be that rock, you know. And I don't think they would say that. I think actually my second son Kincaid wrote me a text months back, and he had read the book. I never asked my boys to read the book. I just think it would be too painful for them anyway.
Right.
But Kincaid did. My son Kincaid did, and he wrote me a text and just told me how proud he was of me. Thank you for walking this journey with me. I mean, that kind of thing. And so it was just like, we try to be so many things, Jeff. And in the midst of the grief that so many people, sometimes you just got to grieve and not try to be everything for everybody, not try to be the pastor of a church, and not try to be the husband to a wife, and not try to be the dad to the kids. I mean, I'm not saying check out. I'm just saying sometimes you've got to walk through that and maybe, take a weekend, for goodness sake, something. To get away and just let yourself be really broken, and not try to be the man and the strong and the this kind of thing, because there's
right.
not there that can cover over a lot of grief and a lot of deep pain if you're not careful.
I have found that most of us, especially in this culture that we live in now, we have a death denying culture.
Yes.
You see it expressed in practical ways, such as, even at funerals, people don't want to go to funerals anymore.
Right.
They'll say things like, "Oh, I just want to remember the way they were." We don't know how to grieve well and deeply. And, taking, like you've said numerous times, taking time. It takes a long process to go through. You can't get over it in a weekend. You can't get over it in a month. I don't know if you ever get over it. I don't even know if it's something you're supposed to get over. It is an enemy. It is our enemy that will eventually be destroyed. I think maybe we'll be over it then.
Yeah, Jeff, it's this whole thing about death. I've completely changed my mind about death. I don't want to say I'm looking forward to it, because that my wife tells me not to say that, but I'm looking forward to it. I am looking, because this is not all there is.
Right.
And that understanding gave us, and some people call it a crutch, that there's this afterlife and there's a heaven waiting for us. And that's where my son Chase is. I'm confident of that. 1 year after Chase died, my nephew died, another 21-year-old kid in my city, just 1 year later. And I believe he's with Chase in heaven. And this is great hope to my wife and I. I can't describe the hope it gives us. Now, just because we have hope of where Chase is does not mean we don't suffer deeply here.
Exactly.
Because the loss is real. We love deeply, you lose deeply. It's just part of this whole thing called life now. And yet with that, we have so much hope in the next life, and I long for it. I long for it, not just to see Chase again. That'll be absolutely amazing.
Yeah.
But I long for it because that's where we're destined for. That's what we were created for. To be with our Maker forever. And everybody we love, and nobody's going to die again, and
Right.
Nobody's going to get sick again. And some people, like I said earlier, they say this is a crutch, and what I tell them now, Jeff, is like, dang, I am so broken. I need a crutch.
Yeah.
I can't do this. I cannot get out of bed without a crutch.
Right.
Without this crutch in particular.
Yeah.
I would be done. I wouldn't be able to survive the loss of a child without hope of where he is and where I'll be one day with him.
Well, it is what the scriptures tell us, isn't it? Even, Paul was writing, I think it was to the Corinthians, and it says, when we weep, we weep as those with hope.
Yes.
You grieve over this horrible enemy that has wreaked such pain and destruction, yet that the story does not end. As believers, we have a hope in the resurrection that it will be made right. And we have that as an anchor for the soul.
And Jeff, with that, I would say, so we have that, right? But this is what we do as Christians. Somebody loses a child or goes through some loss. And these are the first scriptures we start to read.
Yeah.
And that's inappropriate.
Yeah.
And
I
the
agree.
reason why that's inappropriate is not because they don't lack the power to bring hope into that person's life, because they do, but it's inappropriate because it's not the right time.
Yeah.
And they will get there, and they will get there, but they need to get there. It can't be forced by the church. It can't be like this forced hope that, and this forced goodness of God. Some people just need to simply wrestle with the goodness of God for themselves, and not just have, well, I know Romans 8 says it, so okay.
Yeah.
No, I want to know God's good for me. I mean, is he good to me? Like today, is he good to me? And sometimes you've got to go through the valley of the shadow of death to realize that he's still good. And you don't need religious platitudes to help you get there. Matter of fact, they push you away from that experience.
That they do. You told a powerful story in your book that right after the police officers gave you and Suzanne the information, you went back to your office and you were weeping and crying, and Ken, your mentor and your predecessor there at the church, came in. Tell us a little bit about what happened.
It was so powerful, Jeff. I'll never forget it. I mean, my office was awful that day, as you can imagine.
Yeah,
I mean, we were told in the office, we never left the office. I mean, people are hearing as they're walking in the hallway, us wailing. It was awful. And it was in that moment that Ken Johnson came in. Like you said, my mentor, been the lead pastor of this church, a friend of mine for decades. He came in and he sat right next to me. That's not normal, right? I mean, when we have meetings, you sit across from somebody, but I was on a couch and he came and he sat right next to me, and he didn't say anything. He put his hand on my shoulder. He said, "Steve, I'm so sorry." That's all he said. "Steve, I'm so sorry." And then he sat there, Jeff, like he didn't move. He didn't leave. I mean, I can't imagine how awkward it must have been for him to sit there on this couch while me and Suzanne and then my boys started coming from schools. Friends went and got them. And he just sat there and just was with us.
Mm.
And I could hear him quietly praying, but that was it, Jeff. And he was present in our grief. And that became, for me, a picture of what Jesus did for the next several months and continues to do, is he simply sits with us. And he sat with me just like Ken did on that day in my grief, and loved me in it, and didn't try to fix it, and didn't try to make it better, and didn't try to say something profound. He just was there. And did he have things to say to us later? Absolutely, for sure, when I was ready and the time was right. But it wasn't the day of.
Yeah.
I just needed to have somebody with me, and he was one of those guys.
That was one of the one of the many profound things that you shared in the book that really spoke to me, because I've been guilty, as probably 2 or 3 other people have been guilty over the years, of always feeling the pressure. Oh, I've got to give an answer here.
Yes.
And,
Yes.
the Bible says when somebody's weeping, it doesn't say, give an answer to those who weep.
Right.
It says weep with them.
Yes, that's right,
just
Jeff.
be
That's
present
right.
with them.
Just weep with them, and that's such good advice, because when we try to open our mouths, and good people do this, and it's not evil.
Oh, yes.
Nobody's like trying to make it worse. They're trying to make it better. So I understood that, but it wasn't helpful, and so I think people just knowing that it's not helpful. Don't try to fill the quiet space with words. Just be present with people and weep with them is such good advice.
As you've gone on this journey now, here we are approaching
4 years.
4 years that this has been going on. How is the continual healing process going? Because you told us one of the analogies you gave was about the 2 types of wounds. You have a wound, like you get a cut, and that will heal.
Yeah.
And other times there's an amputation that you're not going to be healed from that. You are transformed by that.
Yeah.
This is an amputation.
Yeah.
How is this? Tell me about the process of how you're processing through this and walking with Jesus and your family over this time.
Yeah, that was a metaphor that C.S. Lewis used and Jerry Sitzer in his book, and then I've used it. It's just such a good metaphor to help people realize that there are some deaths that are amputations. They will never, it will never get better. You just have to learn to live without it. And we have. It's still really hard. There are days that are really hard, Jeff, that remind us of Chase. I think about him every day, but it's not like it used to be, where it was really, every time I thought of him, I got really, really sad, It's not that way as much anymore. I would say that, some people say time heals all wounds. I don't know about that, but there is something about time that does help in the process of grieving. And you get to a place where, yeah, I'm still sad. But I'm not the pastor who lost a son anymore. That was my identity for about 3 years. That's what my narrative was. And I'm still a pastor who lost a son. It's just not my identity. It's not what I lead with.
Okay.
Where for 3 years, that's what I led with, that was who I was. That's who I was. And now it's not that. I am a pastor who's lost a child, but I'm also a father to 3 wonderful sons and daughter-in-law, a dog, a mom, a mother that's living with us. There's just so much life around us and so much love and goodness. And I don't want, and Chase, my son, would never want me to live in this dark place for the rest of my life. He would want me to live life to the full right now. And so we've chosen to do that. Times are hard, yes, but the vast majority of our life now is filled with joy again, and laughter and hope. And I'm changed fundamentally, Jeff. I'm changed. I'm different and I will never be the same. I will walk without a limb for the rest of my life. There is nothing that can change that.
Right.
People can't see that on the outside, so it's not apparent. But conversations like this reveal the amputation that has occurred. And I just think about relationships differently. I think about God differently. I think about church differently. I think about the Bible differently. I mean, everything is fundamentally shifted in how I view my worldview. My worldview has shifted because of my son's death.
I don't want to delve into a theological discussion, but you offered an opinion. I'll give you an opinion myself, because,
Great.
We all hear people talk about, when in tragedies like this, oh, it was God's will, or God took my baby, God took this. And I am repulsed by a theology like that personally. I think it sounds like your word. They think of Molech as their God rather than Jesus Christ.
Jeff. Yes.
And yet, what I see is God is so good at redeeming things.
Yeah.
That He redeems it so well. When you look back, you could almost say, "Wow, look at what God did," and He does such a good job redeeming that you see all the good that comes out of it. It would, be on a shallow level easy for someone to ascribe, well, all of this good came out of it. Maybe God initiated it. I don't think God initiated the evil, but I think He redeems the evil.
Yeah, and because He is so good at it, we can make that connect.
Yeah.
Like, well, He must. And sometimes we think God is like this insecure being who wants us to love Him, so He causes suffering in order for us to run to Him.
Right.
I mean, I get it. I understand that, and I struggle with that sometimes myself. But I've come to realize that, God is so good, and if He's not, Jeff, man, everybody run to the hills and hide. Yeah. And because if He's got all this power and He's vindictive and jealous and mean, then man, get out of His way. Yeah. But that's not who we see. Right. In Jesus Christ, we see a God who comes to us, is with us, cries with us, understands our pain, is acquainted with our grief, and He wants to be with us in it. And that's the God I believe in now. I'm not saying there's two different gods. I'm just saying Jesus is the fullest expression of God that we have. Paul writes that. I believe it. I'm full on in. Man, I'm a huge Jesus fan now, way more than I used to be. I mean, everything. He is the center of it all. He should actually be at the beginning of our Bibles, not at the end of our Bibles. He is, or at the middle of our Bibles. He is everything. Everything should be read and filtered through what He has done for us. I mean, and then if you do that, you can start to kind of pick the pieces back up of your brokenness in your life.
How did that happen? How has it transformed you? You mentioned several ways: your walk with Jesus, the way you pastor, the way you're a father. How has God redeemed this? What are some of the
Yeah,
ways that you're seeing the
yeah.
fruit of His redemption?
Well, the biggest thing, oh my goodness, Jeff, I didn't realize how many people have lost children. I
Hmm.
mean, people have been walking in silence about their pain. And because we did not, we chose to walk openly with our community here. I was stunned, my wife and I both, with how many people have lost children that were older, younger, not even born yet. There's so much pain that people just don't know how to process, never had permission to process inside a community of faith, that because we did, it gave others people permission. So one of the greatest things that God has done to redeem our loss is allowed people to be more open with theirs. And
Hmm.
I think that's brought a lot of healing to people. And so that's probably the biggest thing that
Hmm.
God has done. For me personally, I think I'm a better dad, I'm a better husband, I'm a better person, I'm a better individual, because I'm way more empathetic than I used to
Hmm.
be. I see more pain, and I'm not. I used to be really kind of jaded about
Hmm.
brokenness.
Hmm.
You see it long enough, you're like, yeah, okay, seen that, done that, and I'm like, oh my gosh, all we have is our brokenness and our ability to walk with people in their brokenness. And that,
Yeah.
at the end of the day, it's like, how do we bring these two things together? Our hope with other people's brokenness. And so that's been a huge transformative thing. I definitely walk with people differently than I used to.
Hmm. That's that's incredible. I think there's so many things that, I've always respected you. I've known you for a long time. And I think the first time I heard you speak, you had just become the pastor at the Sisters Church, and you were in your 20s. And you spoke at a
Dang,
conference.
that was 25 years ago.
Yeah, you spoke at a district conference in the Northwest years ago, and
You were there at
I was
that?
there.
Oh, I'm
Yeah,
so sorry. That
yeah.
was,
No,
yeah.
it was outstanding. I remember you gave a video clip from Braveheart, and it was outstanding.
Yeah, yeah.
And you told a funny story about how you were so young as a pastor you couldn't drive the church van because the insurance didn't cover you. And
Yeah, the insurance has 24. Yeah, it's funny, Jeff. People still, I mean, that's 25 years ago. People still come up to me and remember that story. They don't remember. I don't even remember what I talked about that day, but that's the story they
yeah,
remember, is
it
the
was
church fan
great.
story.
And then you and I got to know each other when you guys were serving as missionaries in Croatia.
Yeah.
And I used to tease you. I kept your picture, your family picture, on my refrigerator for years.
We
You
looked so
know,
young.
you were also young. So I've always kept you in my heart, praying for you guys, and remember
Thank you, Jeff.
the day that this happened, how tragic it was. But to see
Yeah.
the way that you and Suzanne have allowed grace to embrace you through this. And I was thinking as I was going through your book, I can't imagine writing that, and then you even did the audio version.
Yeah.
You didn't pass that off to another narrator. You actually recorded it yourself.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know how you could have, not reading it would be hard enough, but having to read it out, or writing it would have been hard enough, but reading it out loud, I can't imagine the depth of that.
Yeah. I had a friend who really encouraged me to do that, Jeff, and I'm glad I did. It just brings out the emotive of
Yeah.
what was really going on. And it was really hard. I had to take several cuts with that. I mean, there were sections where I just couldn't get through and had to wait and process it a little bit more and then do it again. But I'm glad I did. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It was something that I will benefit from it. Like I said, I'm so, deeply sorry that it had to be written, but I'm
Yeah.
glad that you wrote it. Thank you. It's a gift.
Thanks, Jeff.
It's going to be a real gift to a lot of people. Now, we're coming to a close on this. I appreciate so much. And this one's going to be a little bit of a different question. I ask it to every one of our guests on the podcast.
Great.
We just told a funny story about you being 24. Well, let's go back to your 24-year-old self.
Okay.
If we had a time machine, we could go back to your 24-year-old self, and you could give yourself some advice. What advice would you give yourself?
Oh man, don't take yourself so seriously, Steve. Just like, I mean, come on, life, you're going to miss most of life by being too serious. I mean, enjoy, have fun, experiment with your wife. I mean, I'm sorry, Jeff. I think I just
No,
went there,
you,
but
we acknowledge the existence of such relationships.
I just I would enjoy. I would enjoy more, Jeff. I
That
would
would,
really enjoy more. I think in our 20s and 30s, we're trying to strive for something, make a name for ourselves, do something significant, get famous. I don't know. There's
yeah,
all kinds of motivations. And now I'm going to be 50 this year, and I realize, wait, I wish I would have slowed down a little bit more back then
yeah,
and enjoyed, smelled the roses a little bit more than I have. Yeah,
yeah.
that's what I would say to myself.
I've asked that of every guest, and I would say that probably 85 to 90% gave a similar answer.
Yeah, yeah,
You
it's
know,
true.
that we're so driven, so much trying to overcome our own insecurities and make our stamp in the world, and life just passes us by.
Yeah, it's not surprising. That's what people say. Yeah,
Yeah.
I feel the same way.
Yeah. Well, Steve, how can people connect with you? What's the best way for them to find out about what?
Yeah, there's we actually created a website around this book,
Mhm.
and I actually think that's probably in light of the topic that we're discussing, is that people can go to that website. It's simply walkinginthedark.org.
Okay.
All one word, walkinginthedark.org. And there's some resources on there. Actually, we created an assessment. It's called a trust assessment, where you take like you answer 20 questions. It's really easy. It only takes about 5 minutes, but individualized report comes to you with what your level of trust in God is at the moment, based on his goodness, on his faithfulness, on his omnipotence, how powerful he is, how you think about God. And then there's some resources that come along with that based on your answer. So anyways, that's on the walkinginthedark.org. And there's
Okay.
also a way to contact me through that website. And then there's some other resources, some articles I've written, different things on there. So
Okay.
that probably the best way to
That's
get a
great.
hold of me. Yeah.
Now let's end this episode by celebrating Chase. Tell me some great things about Chase. I remember seeing some videos. He was a musician. He
Yeah.
played all of this stuff. Tell me some great
Okay.
stuff about
Here's
him.
one of the funniest stories of Chase. He was a worship leader for our youth. And then he started leading worship at a campus that we had started here in Bend. And he shows up one morning to lead worship up in front with no shoes. I don't know where his shoes were. He'd left them someplace, no shoes. And he had this Bob Marley tank top. I mean, it's way too low. And this kid is really hairy. And it was just really inappropriate. I mean, no shoes, Bob Marley tank top, way too low cut. And we're like, Chase, you gotta put something on. And he was completely oblivious. Jesse, like, oh yeah, I guess I probably should, So, but he was just that kind of kid. He was like, he loved life, and he just, what you see is what you got with Chase. And he didn't take himself too seriously. He would always be at family dinners. He would always make time for a relationship. He didn't have a plan for his life. And that always bothered Susanna and me just a little bit. And we're glad that the last year of his life, we just relished in that aspect of Chase. He sold a car. He sold an old beat up truck one time, Jeff, where he got like $500 for it. I mean, it was nothing, but he used the money. Part of the money, he bought me and him Timber soccer tickets for us to go to Portland and watch the Timbers together. And that was 1 month before he died. And
Wow.
it's one of my favorite memories of time spent with Chase. And it was only because he sold this old beat up truck that he had, and he bought me a ticket. That was amazing in and of itself, that he bought something. And then we go together, and he thoroughly enjoyed it. I thoroughly enjoyed it. Yeah. Great kid. The world is definitely not as much fun without him in it.
Wow. Well, Steve, thank you so much for sharing this stuff with us. I know it's been a hard, dark journey, but it's amazing to see how God has graced you and Suzanne, your family. So appreciate you taking time to be with me.
Yeah, love this. Thank you for the opportunity. I love you, Jeff. And it's so appreciate your ministry over the years as well.
Thank you, my friend. Hey, before we go, I want to remind you that you can subscribe to this podcast on iTunes or wherever you get your podcast. Also, I'd like to encourage you to share this episode on social media or through email. Get your friends and family involved if you think it'll help them. And finally, if you benefit from this podcast and or you believe in our ministry of making disciples of nations by developing healthy Foursquare church planting movements, would you consider partnering with us in prayer and even financial support? Go to my website, jeffroper.com, and you'll see the link there that says support our work. We would appreciate it. It helps make this ministry possible. God bless you guys. It's your life. Now go live it.